Can we really take God to court and have him stand trial for his own existence? When Jesus stood before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate in his courtroom, who really was the one on trial? When man tries to stand in judgment against the truth, what accusations are they going to bring forth? Most arguments against God can be boiled down to a few categories. The rational argument, which needs God to dictate the rules of reason. The moral argument, the scientific argument, and the autonomous argument. The problem with all of these arguments against God is that they must presuppose truths about God in order to deny God. When man brings forth arguments against God, they are self-indicting and self-destructive. Take, for example, the often used moral argument against God. How can a good God allow so much pain and suffering in the world? This argument often causes Christians to take cover when in fact it is one of the greatest arguments for God. Let's break it down. In the argument, two huge premises are used to accuse God. First, that there is an objective standard of good. Second, that pain and suffering are bad or evil. Where do we get these thoughts of fairness and goodness? After denying the source of both? This logic is like writing a paper to prove that words do not exist. The tension of evil virtually shouts that there is such a thing as goodness. As C.S. Lewis put it, I could have given up my idea of justice while an atheist by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. Another lightweight argument that parades itself as poignant is that of the scientific laws. The argument is explained in Hawking's book, The Grand Design. It uses the principles of science to explain away God. Many would say that in the past, gods and deities were needed to explain the revolutions of the moon or volcanic eruptions. But today, science can explain all the natural phenomena. To be sure, science is able to explain a lot of what is happening and predict what will happen. But it has no reason to suggest why the laws operate the way they do. For example, imagine that a primitive society stumbles across a shovel and has no idea what it's for. After thousands of years and study, it is determined that it was used for digging holes, and then the natives deny that a hole digger ever existed because they know how shovels now work. It is very difficult to use a natural law to explain away the lawgiver. The ludicrousy of denying the foundations of reason and morality and a lawgiver is evidence rather that God does exist. It supports the biblical claim that man is in denial of God. On top of all that, we must ask ourselves, why is it that a non-conscious universe would create creatures that continually ask why and who? That would write books or watch videos asking questions when there is no purpose to the answer. The discussion of the existence of God by inquiring minds amidst all the preliminary evidence raises a very interesting question. What is it that we are trying to hide? Why do we need God not to exist? For an atheist to claim the moral high ground of intellectual honesty would be self-refuting, because if there is no God, honesty could just as well be a vice or a deception. Which brings about the final and most persuasive argument against God, and the one the Bible lists as the primary reason for unbelief, the autonomous argument. The autonomous argument is very rarely used in argumentation, but is probably the strongest argument for persuasion, with also the least amount of evidence. Those that adhere to the self-rule argument don't want a holy God. They don't want a holy God to exist, so they have to believe God does not exist to allow their actions. At core, this is the heart of the arguments against God. Man prefers his autonomy and therefore will seek to deny God's right to rule by any means possible, in the laboratory or the brothel. Mankind doesn't want a ruler. And this is the most common argument used by Christians and atheists alike in order to justify their denial of God.